Welcome everyone. I know this is a bit of an odd day because of the snow. Mr. Udall and ice, rather. Mr. Udall was stuck, but he was supposed to have arrived at the airport at quarter till 10, and so hopefully he is on his way, and I'm sure other members are dealing with their own various problems. But Dr. Griffin, you were here on time, and we respect that and feel like that we need to move forward with this important hearing. So, with that, this committee will come to order. Today's hearing will be Congress's first opportunity to review the President's fiscal year 2009 NASA budget request. The FY09 budget request is not just a collection of funding levels and program descriptions. Rather, it defines the administration's priorities for NASA and its vision for what NASA should be doing in the coming years. In that regard, this budget request and Congress's disposition of that through the authorizing and appropriation process this year will in large measure define the state of the space and aeronautics program that will be inherited by the next president. So, the stakes are high. As many of you know, this year marks the 50th anniversary of the dawn of the U.S. space program and the establishment of NASA. It also marks the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the Science and Technology Committee. We and NASA were a direct result of the Soviet Sputnik launch, an event that sent shockwaves throughout the American government and the American public. In fact, our committee was established in part to help define an appropriate American response to Sputnik and to oversee America's fledgling space program. Now, 50 years after NASA's birth, I think that this committee needs to take a hard look at where NASA is headed and whether or not the course that the current administration has set NASA on is an appropriate one and one that should be followed by the next administration, whether it be Democrat or Republican. We need to develop a congressional consensus on what NASA should be doing and, equally important, on what level of resources this nation is willing to commit to NASA. I thought we had achieved such a consensus in the NASA Authorization Act of 2005, which was passed by the Congress and signed by the President. Yet the administration's actions since that time, unfortunately, have not helped to maintain that consensus. In particular, I believe that the administration has to date failed to provide resources to NASA that are adequate for what it has asked NASA to do and what it agreed in the Authorization Act. And that's not just my opinion. If you review our committee's hearings over the past several years, you will find bipartisan expressions of concern over the mismatch between NASA's task and the resources it's been given. We see the impact of that approach to NASA through the budget request that we are being reviewed today. Thus, we see an aeronautics program that continues on a downward path, despite clear consensus or congressional direction that echoes our belief that NASA's aeronautics R&D activities are critical to our competitiveness, the safety and effectiveness or efficiency of our aviation system, and our quality of life. And despite clear evidence that our current air traffic control system is antiquated and under severe stress. In the science area, the situation is uncertain. The good news is that NASA has at least taken steps consistent with congressional urging and direction to initiate new Earth science missions recommended by the National Academies in its recent decadal survey. The bad news is that the funding for those Earth science missions doesn't reflect any new commitment on the part of the administration to enhance NASA's overall science program. Instead, funding for those missions will be provided by shifting money from other Earth science research activities as well as other NASA science accounts in the coming years. In short, a musical chairs approach to science funding. Yet the successive cuts to NASA's aeronautics portfolio and uncertain outlook for NASA science program have not resulted in any corresponding dividends for NASA's human spaceflight program or its exploration initiative that could be cited as rationales for the administration's approach to NASA. Quite the opposite. In NASA's exploration program, the FY09 budget request provides no funds to reduce the looming gap in U.S. human access to space once the shuttle is retired, in spite of widespread concern about this potential impact. Indeed, given the low levels of reserves allocated to the Constellation program over the next several years, it's hard to have confidence, even in NASA's stated 2015 delivery date for the Crew Exploration Vehicle, a date 5 years after the shuttle is retired. In addition, NASA's technological program, something that should be the bedrock of R&D agency, has been progressively whittled away to the point it is largely an afterthought in the FY09 budget request. And then there is the issue of the parting gifts, left to the next administration in the form of unfunded and underfunded requirements for the FY09 NASA request. For example, the 5-year run-out for the shuttle program that accompanies the FY09 request contains no money for shuttle retirement and transition costs past 2010, even though NASA agrees that such funds will be required. Instead, any money needed for shuttle retirement and transition costs will have to come out of the exploration account, which itself will already be facing large funding requirements in 2011 if the Lunar program proceeds under NASA's planned schedule. NASA's 5-year budget contains no funding for the replacement of the Deep Space Network, even though NASA concedes it needs to happen if NASA is to have capability to support all of the important space missions that will be occurring in the coming decades. And finally, I'm concerned that the administration's 5-year budget request does not appear to allocate sufficient funding to meet the International Space Station's utilization and operations requirement after the shuttle is retired. Indeed, NASA itself identifies ISS cargo and crew transportation as, and I quote, the greatest program and budget risk, unquote, to the ISS program. I could go on, but I hope my point is clear. NASA and its space and aeronautics research programs are important to our standing in the world, important to our nation's scientific and technological future and foundation, and important to our quality of life. Dr. Griffin and his team are dedicated and hardworking and represent some of the best and brightest in the nation. Yet I'm afraid that this budget and the vision for NASA that it represents fails them in several important ways. I hope that Dr. Griffin will help the committee to address these issues both today and in the coming months. We need a sustainable and productive space and aeronautics program for America, one that can be embraced by the next president and the next Congress. And that's what I want us to focus on this year as we work to reauthorize NASA. With that, I want to welcome once again to the hearing today Dr. Griffin, and I look forward to your testimony. And now the chair recognizes Mr. Hall for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. And my thanks to the NASA Administrator Mike Griffin, who's, I think, doing a superb job leading and managing the agency during this especially difficult time as NASA strives to complete the International Space Station, retire the shuttle, and build a new human-rated launch system with an escape module. The fiscal year 2009 NASA budget request continues to treat NASA favorably, especially when compared to other federal non-defense discretionary programs. The FY09 request proposes to increase NASA's funding by 1.8% compared to the last budget request, and the percentage is even higher when compared to the agency's FY08 appropriations that was signed into law late last year. Excuse me. Having said that, NASA is under enormous financial strain as it seeks to safely fly out Shuttle to its planned retirement in 2010 while concurrently paying for the design and construction of the new constellation system and maintaining a balanced and robustly funded science and aeronautics research portfolio. There are many in this room, myself among them, and in the Space and Science community, who would argue that the more money is needed, but the broader federal budget realities make that possibility very difficult at this time. Given the current budget profile, I believe Administrator Griffin is making the right choices, and I also believe it's vitally important that NASA continues to keep the Constellation program on schedule to meet a 2015 launch date, if not sooner, and it's essential that we minimize to the greatest degree possible the amount of time that the U.S. goes without a manned space launch capability. The prospect of being entirely reliant on our international partners for access to and from space is one that could have serious implications for America's space supremacy. Our country needs the Constellation system. It will offer many new capabilities, most notably the ability to go beyond low Earth orbit on long-duration missions. and will also be a much safer vehicle, providing its crews a far more reliable means of escape in the event of a launch mishap. I understand the need for phasing out Shuttle to free up resources for the development of the Constellation, but Congress should be mindful that this budget request, and particularly the Constellation program budget, is very, very lean, with little margin to cover unanticipated cost increases. If there are surprises, either Congress will have to provide the resources to address them or be prepared to accept a gap of greater than 5 years. So I urge NASA, industry, and Congress to work together to ensure we get back to space as soon as possible. Equally important is the need to maintain a skilled workforce to support Constellation. We cannot afford to lose these people, such as we did between Apollo and Shuttle, and the longer the gap, the greater the risk we won't be able to retain the talented pool of engineers and technicians who currently support Shuttle. I guarantee that if our government's commitment to the Constellation program begins to waver, or if the gap extends and we can't provide meaningful jobs that have clear promise for a predictable and robust launch schedule, we'll lose these folks to other industries. The cost of time and money to train replacement will be enormous. Finally, Mr. Griffin, knowing that you have a complex assembly mission now underway, knowing of all the problems we face, the budget cuts back, all of us greatly appreciate your willingness to take time out of a very, very busy schedule to appear before this committee and help us as you've done since you've occupied the position you're in, and I thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Let me just quickly point out, I know many of you have been in this room many times before. We have not ostracized our former chairman. We are just in the process of trying to renovate some, and I think even Mr. Sensenbrenner's photograph may be recovered. We're not sure, though. Mr. Udall, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Dr. Griffin. This hearing marks the beginning of our consideration of NASA's fiscal year 2009 budget request, as well as providing us with an opportunity to engage with Dr. Griffin on a range of NASA-related issues. NASA's been in the news in both positive and not so positive ways over the last year. In particular, I would note that our committee has had to ask the Government Accountability Office to analyze air safety data from the National Aviation Operations Monitoring Service pilot survey because NASA had refused to do so. We're all disappointed that we had to take that step, but rest assured that I intend to continue my oversight of this and other issues that need our subcommittee's attention. Turning to the budget request at this point, it's clear that NASA faces significant challenges in carrying out the tasks that the nation has asked it to assume. And those challenges have been made more difficult by the inadequate NASA budgets that have been sent over to the Hill from the White House over the past several years. I'd hoped that this budget request for NASA, which represents President Bush's last budget submission, would have reflected an intention by the administration to finally address the impact of the previous shortfalls, yet in the main it does not. The budget request has been described as a stay-the-course budget, and I do believe that that's an all too accurate description. This budget continues the underfunding of the agency that's become painfully apparent in 2004 when the White House announced a major human and robotic exploration initiative, including returning American astronauts to the moon by 2020, while making a virtue of the fact that it was only adding $1 billion in new money to NASA's budget over the first 5 years of the Moon-Mars initiative. Since that time, it has sent over NASA budget requests that have consistently fallen short of what the administration itself had said would be needed to establish or to enable NASA to carry out the initiative and its other core missions. Now, despite the fact that there's a projected 5-year gap in the U.S.'s capability to get its astronauts into space after the shuttle is retired, and despite the fact that the Exploration Initiative's Constellation program currently has reserves of less than 8% to cover any problems the development program might encounter over the next 2 years, the administration has chosen not to request any additional funding for the Constellation program in this latest budget request, despite congressional encouragement from both sides of the aisle to do so. That's not a great message to send to NASA and the contractor teams that are working so hard to implement the President's initiative, nor does it send a good signal to the next President, whoever it might be, that the Exploration Initiative is a priority worth continuing. What are the other ways in which this NASA budget request stays the course? Well, it continues the practice of marginalizing NASA's Aeronautics R&D program in spite of congressional concern and direction to the contrary over the past several years. It's clear that the nation's aviation system is under severe stress, and NASA research will be needed if we are to move successfully to a next-generation air traffic management system while protecting the environment and maintaining safety. The administration's current approach to NASA's aeronautics enterprise simply is not going to get the job done. In the space operations arena, staying the course unfortunately means continuing the practice of leaving unfunded and underfunded liens for the next administration to deal with, whether it be the costs of shuttle transition and retirement, deep space network replacement, or logistical support of the International Space Station. That is a troubling approach given the already over-constrained nature of NASA's out-year budgetary plan. There's one area, however, where stay the course was not followed, at least in part, and that is in NASA's science program. It appears that NASA did take steps in the fiscal 09 budget request to respond to concerns expressed by many in the science community and in Congress. The budget request contains new starts for high-priority Earth science missions recommended by the National Academies in its recent decadal survey, something I strongly support. In addition, funding is allocated to augment NASA's research and analysis activities and to revitalize the suborbital research program, actions that will help train the next generation of space scientists and engineers. In addition, NASA has announced that it intends to undertake an ambitious series of new missions, including JDEM, a solar probe, an exoplanet detection mission, a Mars sample return mission, a major outer planets mission, as well as a significant increase in its lunar science initiative. It sounds very exciting and promising. However, the reality is that no new money is being requested for NASA's science account to carry out all these new initiatives beyond what had previously been assumed. So in effect, money is simply being transferred between science accounts. That sounds a lot like the approach the administration used to pay for the Exploration Initiative and human spaceflight programs, and we see how well that has worked. In addition, the bulk of the funding requirements for these new initiatives occurs beyond this budget's planning horizon. In short, finding the necessary money will be the task of the next president and future Congresses. I hope that we will be able to undertake at least some of the worthwhile new initiatives being proposed. I am a strong supporter of a robust and exciting science program. But we only have to recall the administration's Project Prometheus and the GMO mission to know that bold announcements don't always translate into real programs. Well, I don't want to belabor the point, but it's clear that NASA faces a number of important challenges. I intend to work hard this year to develop legislation to reauthorize NASA, and today's hearing will provide important input to that effort. Again, Dr. Griffin, welcome, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Feeney is recognized for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing today. Between the Chairman, the Ranking Member Hall, and Chairman Udall, I think they've outlined virtually all the major challenges facing NASA in the upcoming years to be considered by this committee. I want to welcome the NASA Administrator, Michael Griffin, to our committee. We're fortunate for your leadership. I think that Mr. Hall said it very well. We're also fortunate for the retirement of the term spiral development from NASA's lexicon, and that's a step forward. With the passage of time, we run the risk of reverting back to pre-Columbia behavior. As the Columbia Accident Investigation Board observed, in quotes, NASA has usually failed to receive budgetary support consistent with its ambitions. The result is an organization straining to do too much with too little. Both the legislative and the executive branch are susceptible of lapsing into this behavior. On Capitol Hill, we're often eager to assign new missions to NASA. This compliment stems from NASA's incredible ability to perform the most difficult of assignments. Last November's solar array repair conducted by astronaut Scott Parazynski proves a recent example of such seemingly effortless success in the face of an unexpected and daunting challenge. But in fiscal, and I agree with the notion that has been pointed out by both Chairman Gordon and Chairman Udall, that at times the administration has fallen short of funding its own priorities. But I would also point out that in the fiscal year 07 Omnibus Continuing Resolution, Congress appropriated to NASA $545 million less than the President's request with that reduction, and then some coming from NASA's current and future human spaceflight programs. In the recently passed Fiscal '08 Omnibus, Congress further reduced the agency's funding request to a $192.5 million rescission. Today, the administration's fiscal year '09 budget request of $17.6 billion is 1.8% above last year's request. After factoring in inflation, NASA's resources are shrinking in real terms, while the agency is charged with maintaining America's preeminence as a spacefaring nation. Maintaining such preeminence includes developing a new generation of human spaceflight vehicles to replace the Space Shuttle. As the Columbia Accident Investigation Board correctly noted, it is the view of the board that the previous attempts to develop a replacement vehicle for the aging shuttle represented a failure of national leadership. The board went on to state, continued U.S. leadership in space is an important national objective. That leadership depends on a willingness to pay the costs of achieving it. Administrator Griffin, I know you understand this truth, and you've been a great advocate in front of this committee and everywhere you go, pointing out to Americans the importance of the task laid out before you and the entire NASA team. The outstanding question is whether anyone else is listening. Yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Finney. You know, although it may have been said different ways, I think it's clear that there's a bipartisan agreement that what NASA is asked to be doing is not properly matched with NASA's funding. As we go through this year and as we try to develop a consensus reauthorization, we're going to have to deal with that reality. Now, thank you for listening to us pontificate. And Mr. Griffin, you're the one that we came here to hear today, and so now you are recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Gordon, Ranking Member Hall, Chairman Udall, Ranking Member Finney. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss our budget request of $17.6 billion. I want to highlight briefly the key features of this request, as well as to outline some areas where I will need the committee's help, and then, of course, I want to answer your questions. It's not me, sir. All right. Last week, Shuttle Atlantis delivered the European Columbus module to the International Space Station. Next up is Endeavour, with the Japanese Kibo logistics module and the Canadian Dexter manipulator arm. After that, Discovery delivers the Kibo pressurized module. With these flights, we're honoring our nation's commitments to our international partners on station and meeting the most prominent milestones of the program. Throughout 4 presidential administrations and over 20 congressional votes authorizing tens of billions of dollars for its development, the space station remains an established feature of U.S. space policy. Its development is the largest task ever performed by the civilian agencies of the United States or our international partners. Such international partnerships are an integral part of our next steps out beyond low Earth orbit toward what President Kennedy called this new ocean. NASA is also taking the necessary steps to ensure that space exploration is not simply all government all the time. That's not the way the American West was developed. It's not how the greatest aviation system in the world was developed, and it ought not to be the way we develop the space frontier. Now is the time, and we are the people, to make provisions for the contribution of the commercial space sector to our nation's overall space enterprise. I believe that we can open the ISS to purchases by NASA of cargo and crew services developed and provided by commercial entrepreneurs in companies both large and small. For this purpose, NASA's budget for '09 provides $173 million to leverage private investments in developing and demonstrating commercial space transportation capability. Now, more than $2.6 billion is budgeted over the next 5 years to purchase cargo and crew services to support ISS operations. I would prefer to use as much of that as possible to purchase transportation services from American commercial companies rather than foreign entities. However, while I believe that we will have U.S. commercial cargo transport services over the next few years, along with European and Japanese capability, it is my carefully considered assessment that U.S. commercial crew transport vehicles will not likely be available by 2012. The prospective purveyors of such services, of course, claim otherwise, and actually I wish them all possible success. No one hopes more than I that they are right and I'm wrong. But our ability to sustain the station cannot be held hostage to hope. Thus, given existing legislative restrictions, we will require explicit authorization by the Congress to make further extraordinary payments to Russia in order to provide crew transport on Soyuz to the station after 2011 for our astronauts, as well as those of our international partners to whom we have obligations. Chairman Gordon and members of this committee, we will need your help with this. NASA needs this legislative authorization in 2008 because Russia requires 36 months of lead time to fabricate new Soyuz vehicles, and thus we need to finalize contractual agreements late this year if we expect to fly in the spring of 2012. For reference, NASA's current contract with Russia is worth about $780 million through 2011. Now, I yield to no one in my belief that we need to minimize our dependence on the Russian Soyuz and protect against proliferation of weapons technology to our adversaries. It is dangerous for the United States to find itself dependent upon any external entity for a strategic capability, and space transportation is just that. I've been outspoken to the point of bluntness on this matter since being confirmed as administrator in April of 2005. I deplore the posture in which we find ourselves. It is unseemly in the extreme. But today there is no other viable option. We are today reliant upon the Russian Soyuz for the sustenance of the International Space Station. Because this is a fact, and because I am guided by facts, I'm glad that there are Russian services to buy and that Russia is a member of the Space Station Partnership. Their participation gives the United States time to develop U.S. cargo and crew transport systems while preserving the tens of billions of dollars we've invested in the ISS. But we will need your help, not only in supporting our budget request, but also with legislation authorizing NASA to purchase Russian crew transport for the ISS after 2011. Some have suggested that this dilemma can be avoided by continuing to fly the shuttle past the currently planned retirement in 2010. I must be clear. We will remain dependent upon the Russian Soyuz system until a new commercial crew vehicle is qualified for orbital flights of 6 months duration, or until the Ares and Orion systems are deployed, because the Soyuz provides emergency crew return for all astronauts and cosmonauts on board ISS. Delaying space shuttle retirement does not solve that problem. In fact, it exacerbates it. Money spent flying the shuttle after 2010 is not available for Ares and Orion, which causes the gap between shuttle retirement and deployment of new systems to grow, and with it the duration of dependence upon Russian systems. Further, I share the view of the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, to which Mr. Feeney referred earlier, and which the CABE referred to as an inescapable conclusion, quoting, "Because of the risk inherent in the original design of the space shuttle, because that design was based in many aspects on now obsolete technologies, because the shuttle is now an aging system but still developmental, it is in the nation's interest to replace the shuttle as soon as possible as the primary means for transporting humans to and from Earth orbit. For this very reason, the board expressed dismay at how, quote, previous attempts to develop a replacement vehicle for the aging shuttle represent a failure of national leadership, and called for a rigorous vehicle safety recertification if the shuttle were to be operated past 2010. So that brings us to today. With the budgetary resources currently projected, especially for the critical development years of 2009 and 10, we can realistically forecast Ares and Orion becoming available in early 2015. That said, the engineering and design teams for Orion and Ares in Houston, Huntsville, Cape Canaveral, Cleveland, Denver, Norfolk, California, and many, many other parts of the country are trying to beat that prediction. And so again, I hope they are right and I'm wrong. But leaving budgetary issues aside, especially those in the next couple of critical years, the earliest date we could possibly bring Ares and Orion online would be in the fall of 2013, and that would cost additional money. Now, the past several appropriation cycles have resulted in funding reductions for exploration in favor of other priorities. This has delayed our ability to bring these new systems online. Because of the strategic importance of these first elements of the Constellation system, because of the unseemly posture of U.S. reliance on Russia for a strategic capability, because American taxpayers are today paying Russian aerospace engineers to do work that should be done by Americans, because we will face growing competition from the advancing Chinese space program, and because we are in the middle of a difficult once-in-a-generation transition from the Shuttle to a new human spaceflight system, I ask that Congress fully fund NASA's exploration effort. It's critical to our nation's leadership in space. Now, despite the demands of this once-in-a-generation transition, this budget request provides an appropriate balance between human spaceflight, Earth and space science, and aeronautics research. NASA is operating 55 science missions today, peering into the farthest reaches of the universe, digging among the rocks of Mars, monitoring our sun's behavior, and conducting research on the causes and effects of global warming on our planet. The 09 budget provides $910 million over the next 5 years for high-priority Earth science missions as recently defined by the National Academy of Sciences. Our nation's investment in Earth science is paying dividends, and we're shifting funds from other science disciplines because of the recognition on the part of the public and policymakers of the value of global warming research coming from NASA's Earth scientists. NASA satellites supply more global climate change data than those of any other organization in the world, and we remain the largest contributor to the Interagency Climate Change Science Program. We plan to launch 14 new science missions in the next 2 years, and in late August or early September, we plan to launch the much-anticipated final Space Shuttle servicing mission for Hubble. As these missions are completed, funds become available for new missions. That said, I must report to you, per the NASA Authorization Act of 2005, Major Program Reporting Requirements, that NASA's current development cost estimate of about $325 million for the Glory Earth Science mission has exceeded the 30% threshold in cost growth. Thus, it will require explicit authorization in the next 18 months to continue. Glory is a high-priority mission for Earth science, and I hope you will allow it to continue. In aeronautics, we're aligning our research efforts with the many other agencies in the federal government also conducting such research. In partnership with the member agencies of the JPDO, we're conducting fundamental research on environmental, safety, and capacity challenges facing our nation's air transportation system. We're developing world-class aeronautics expertise, and we're closely coordinating the use of our research and test facilities with that of other federal agencies. We're also pursuing innovative partnerships with commercial companies to better leverage private investment toward national goals in aeronautics and other areas. In conclusion, Chairman Gordon, Ranking Member Hall, I want to thank this committee for its time and attention. We have many challenges, but I believe the greatest challenge we face is to maintain a unified purpose throughout the difficult transition from Shuttle to Constellation. Space exploration is not for the faint of heart, nor for those who are easily distracted. I recently spoke at Calvin College in Grand Rapids, where Congressman Vern Ehlers taught physics for 17 years. In that speech, I explained how the leaders of the House Science and Technology Committee, whose pictures used to adorn these walls, spoke passionately of the need for a unifying space policy in the wake of the Space Shuttle Columbia loss. The President heeded that advice in issuing the Vision for Exploration, which, after almost 2 years of informed debate, culminated in the NASA Authorization Act of '05. That legislation, enacted with strong bipartisan majority, codified into law the unifying vision called for by the Columbia Accident Investigation Board. I personally believe that it is the best civil space policy this nation has had since the time of Apollo. It provides a unified direction as to where we're headed, a sense of purpose, and a lasting legacy for the crew of Columbia and those among our nation's leaders who recognize the strategic importance of space exploration. Most importantly, it is the law of the land, and today we at NASA are turning that law into concerted action. Former chairman of the House Science Committee, Congressman Bob Walker from Pennsylvania, framed the issue perfectly in a speech shortly after Columbia. Quote, "For every generation, choices are made that lead to greatness or to mediocrity." End quote. So it's all a matter of what each generation in its time here on Earth chooses to do with its energy, resources, and intellect. I want to thank this committee for having chosen a path that leads to greatness, and I ask for your help in staying that course. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Griffin, for your testimony and, more importantly, for your service to our nation. In respect of your time, we're going to try to do a tag team. Mr. Udall and Mr. Feeney have already gone. We're going to temporarily adjourn, which I hope is no more than 2 or 3 minutes, as they come back, and then we're going to go vote, and we'll be back.
As always, I'm at your
let's
disposal.
just, everybody stay tuned, and we'll hopefully, in a matter of 2 or 3 minutes, be started again.
Yes, sir.
Committee will come back to order. I would note for everybody who is here that Ranking Member Feeney and others have informed me that we will see a series of procedural votes throughout the rest of this hearing, so we're going to proceed with questions for Dr. Griffin, and hopefully everybody here, members here, will have a chance to direct their questions. Dr. Griffin, I will yield myself 5 minutes. Dr. Griffin, as you know, I've long been concerned about the state of NASA's aeronautics programs, especially those focused on aviation safety and on improving the efficiency of the nation's air traffic management system. The erosion of the aeronautics budgets over the last 7 years or more calls into question the ability of NASA to continue to make significant contributions to either of those important areas. That's not just my view. It's a warning voiced repeatedly by multiple hearing witnesses over the last several years. As I look at the 09 budget request, I'm struck by the fact that all three of the main NASA aeronautics research accounts, that's aviation safety, airspace systems, and fundamental aeronautics, are each essentially flat over the next 5 years. That to me is a keep alive strategy driven by inadequate budgets rather than a strategy that's geared toward identifying the key challenges facing aviation and building R&D programs and budgets to address those challenges. So let me do this. Let me ask you, if you were to receive additional funding from Congress, aeronautics funding, because obviously you aren't going to get it from this OMB, what would you consider to be the highest priority for those additional funds? Aviation safety, next-gen air transportation, system support, or something else?
Thank you. So I would want to provide a detailed answer on that for the record, because our program does not contemplate the addition of funds to it. But loosely speaking, I would offer that I know that we are meeting in conjunction with the FAA and our other partners all of our obligations on NextGen. There's always more research to be done, but the FAA will tell you that NASA is meeting its obligations to the JPDO on NextGen. Aviation safety is, again, a well-funded program. We are doing numerous activities in cooperation with the FAA on aviation safety. I'm pretty happy with that. So I would probably put additional money into fundamental aeronautics research to get at the underlying aeronautical science advances. I was thrilled with our work on blended wing-body systems last year, and the potential advantage that such a system has to increase efficiency, reduce emissions, enhance safety, provide quieter rides, all of those things for future air transport. Fundamental aeronautics at NASA one could always do more work with more money.
Well, thank you for peering over the horizon for the committee, and I do agree that investment in more fundamental research would really pay dividends. Let me turn to climate research. I'm encouraged by your plans to start work on two of the high-priority Earth science missions recommended by the National Academies. And I'm also glad to hear that at last there appears to be some progress on finding homes for the climate instruments that have been removed from NPO's spacecraft, as you're well aware. However, I'm unclear about NASA's plans for at least one of those instruments, the Total Solar Irradiance Sensor. I think it's also known by its acronym TSIS. And specifically, can you tell me when a decision will be made as to how and when the TSIS instrument will be flown? What's driving the decision on where to manifest the instrument? What's your responsibility, NASA's that is, regarding the instrument, especially in 08 and 09 fiscal years? What's the status of the instrument development team? Is the team fully funded? And if so, have those funds actually been dispersed yet to the team? And when does the TSIS instrument, need to fly in order to avoid data gaps in the total solar irradiance measurements? A lot of questions. Thank you for
that. Is a lot of questions, yes, sir. And to answer all those in an appropriate fashion, I will again provide a detailed answer on the record. Let me give you again a top-level summary. Our immediate priorities are to fly VIIRS and series instruments. The highest priorities that we have. TSIS is important. The measurements that it makes is critically important. But we have ongoing other ways to make that measurement, so that the flying of TSYS by itself is not our immediate highest priority. The instrument development team is funded at a lower level, of course, than they would like, but it is funded, and we are looking for the right ride for TSYS. We haven't found it yet. We'll identify that to you as soon as we can. But again, I want to close the summary answer here by saying that the continuity of the measurement that TSYS makes is what is most important. We have other sensors which are going to ensure the continuity of this particular measurement, and so the exact date on which we fly TSYS is not our first priority at the moment.
Thank you, Dr. Griffin. The chair is honored and excited to recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Hall, Judge Hall from the great state of Texas.
Any Udall's all right with me, let me tell you. Chairman, thank you. Mike, NASA's given us a good plan to replace the space shuttle with the Ares-1 for crew access to space, and later add it for heavy cargo to space. And it's a plan that I support and which the Congress has agreed to. Nonetheless, there are a lot who continue to second-guess this architecture and suggest that we might be able to use one of the existing Atlas V or Delta IV launches to take our crews into space. I know NASA has looked at this closely, and I'm sure you've made the right decisions, but would you summarize again for us the factors that led NASA to conclude that a new launch vehicle was needed for the Orion spacecraft? And go slow where even I can understand it.
Yes, sir. I have dealt with this question a lot. At the top level, let me point out what is at issue here. At the top level, I think we need to recognize that it's not a question.
You know, you caused that bell to ring for some reason. I don't know how that happens.
I must.
But go ahead.
It is not a question of whether we're going to use a new system for Constellation or an existing system. If that were the trade, I would be on the side of using the existing system. What is not been recognized is that there is no system today which can meet the Constellation requirements. So the question is, are we going to upgrade the EELV family to meet Constellation needs, or are we going to upgrade the Shuttle-derived family to meet Constellation needs? No system in existence today can meet our needs. So the question is, would we use a Shuttle-derived architecture or an EELV-derived architecture? When we examined the situation closely, it turned out that the lowest risk solution, the highest performance solution, and the lowest cost solution was obtainable by using our shuttle hardware heritage as opposed to our EELV hardware heritage. There's nothing wrong with either system, but when the issues of performance, cost, and risk are considered, the shuttle-derived one. I think that's the kind of decision that you would want me to make.
Let me go a step further and ask a quick question. I think yesterday in California there's a group of leading space, I guess so-called space policy experts, they may be experts, discussing the direction and content of vision for space exploration. They're particularly critical about using the moon as an interim step for eventually traveling to Mars. Would you care to share any thoughts about the need for a lunar program since we've been there?
Well,
once.
Yes, sir. I'm always intrigued by the idea that since we've spent a few days on the moon, that the place is now uninteresting for all future time, and that we should ignore it and head straight for Mars. So first of all, I believe that people will find the moon to be an exciting and interesting place for human beings in the future, and I strongly support its inclusion as an appropriate destination for humans, as I do Mars. The argument that this group of space policy experts is putting forth comes down fundamentally to one about the choice of destinations. They do not see the moon as a valuable destination. I do. They would prefer that the funds that we are presently allocating toward returning to the moon and then going to Mars be utilized to put large telescopes near one of the Lagrange points, to visit near-Earth asteroids, and to go more quickly to Mars. I regard that as foolish, frankly. The moon is 3 days and 250,000 miles from home. When we return to the moon, we will have not been there for 50 years. The Lagrange points, even granting, as I absolutely do, their immense value as sites to host large telescopes, are 1,000,000 miles away and weeks away from home, going and coming. The near-Earth asteroids, which I also am interested in and believe should be an appropriate destination, are many months away from home, and Mars is further yet. So a correctly orchestrated space program would take us outward from Earth orbit to the nearest possible destination, which is the moon, and then would take us outward from there to successively farther destinations as we consolidate our capabilities and consolidate our gains. That's the program we have in place. That's the program that this Congress passed in the 2005 Authorization Act. It's the properly arranged program. So I cannot agree with so-called space policy experts who believe that the moon is not an appropriate goal for our exploration efforts.
Buzz Aldrin just a little bit ago, and he sure doesn't look like a guy that is 50 years ago that he was up there.
Buzz is
he must have been 5 when we sent him up.
Buzz is my hero. I wish to be in his condition at that age.
Mine too. I wish he'd have stepped off first, and I think he was scheduled to. He says he was.
But anyway, let's move past that one.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Hall. We'll let the bells continue. Once again, Dr. Griffin, we are going to do a tag team here. In your testimony, you spent a lot of time discussing the need for Russian transportation after the 2011, during this gap period.
I did, sir.
And you also talked about how you're going to need to move forward with the negotiating contract, and that you can't do that without some change in the Iran, North Korean, and Syrian Non-Proliferation Act. So do you expect the administration to send us a formal request for that legislative action?
Yes, sir. My comments today were in the nature of a heads up.
The administration will be sending something.
I hope so. I have initiated those conversations within the administration. It is my intent to seek such a request. It obviously requires a coordination among many agencies, but I intend to do everything I can to press it forward, simply because of the timelines involved. As I point out, our authorization to utilize Russian services expires in 2011.
You made that point.
So if we want to fly in...
I understand that,
okay,
but
yes, sir.
To be successful, you're going to have this initiated from the administration.
That's correct, sir, and I intend to press for that. Okay. I do not have that authorization yet. I intend to seek.
And when would you expect that you would have that?
I need it by this summer.
No. I mean, when would you expect? When there is a time frame, when would you expect the administration to decide this was worthy, and then to make the request?
I don't know.
When do you think it would be too late if they didn't?
It needs to be done within this administration, so prior to next January.
And through the legislative process also?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Dr. Griffin, as you know, NASA has been forced to operate in a very constrained budgetary environment in recent years, as we've discussed today. I want to make sure that this committee is aware of any areas in this budget request that there are funding shortfalls that a future administration and Congress will need to deal with. In that regard, how confident are you that sufficient funding has been set aside in NASA's 5-year run-out budget to pay for the ISS crew and cargo transportation?
Wow, that calls for a conclusion of the witness. which as a former prosecutor I think you're familiar with, let me offer you the range of possibilities, if I might. In March of '07, we did, and in the course of preparing the space station utilization plan that this committee asked for, and which we have furnished you, we did a very careful assessment of crew and cargo requirements, and to utilize the station after it is assembled, we came up with a range from 32.5 metric tons to just under, call it 45 metric tons of cargo, depending on the degree that the U.S. Laboratory is utilized. If it's fully utilized, it's the 45 metric tons, and if it's less so, it would be 32 metric tons. I don't want to quote specific numbers because it affects procurement actions, but I can phrase it this way. If we utilize the station only at the low end of our estimates, then future commercial procurements of cargo would have to do no worse than we are doing today, at a time when, of course, we will be in much more of a hostage situation than we are today. Today we have alternatives. After the shuttle is retired, we won't. So looking forward at the minimum possible utilization of the station, the 32 metric tons of cargo, looking past 2010, we would have to do at least as well as we're doing today for our contractual price. If we are fortunate enough, as I hope we would be, and I know you are too, to get a heavy utilization of the station, then at the 45 metric ton level, then we would have to do somewhat better in the out years than we are doing today with our commercial procurement of cargo, and I don't consider that to be very likely. So I hope I was clear without quoting numbers that I don't want to quote in public.
So to avoid either significant additional funds or cannibalizing other programs, everything has to go just right, no inflation, and the Russians have to not take advantage of their hostage position.
Or other potential suppliers in that same time frame. Yes, sir, that would be correct.
Yeah, I think it might be beneficial, Dr. Griffin. We had a conversation yesterday at which time I said to you that approximately 3 years ago, when we were discussing the ability of China to get to the moon and a time frame, that you somewhat poo-pooed their ability, that they did not have the infrastructure, and you really weren't particularly concerned about that. Have you changed your I won't say changed. Has your opinion been more informed, or have you gained additional information, and what is your thought about that situation now?
I've gotten a lot of questions on that lately, sir, and I'd be happy to answer this one. And I don't mind if you say that I changed my mind. I often do that in response to new data.
Yeah, sure. Which is nothing wrong with that.
You're correct. A few years ago, I was not particularly concerned about Chinese primacy in human spaceflight relative to that of the United States. Since then, their accomplishments, as well as their stated plans, combined with my visit to China, combined, frankly, with an assessment of what is available from open sources on the Internet, lead me to believe.
Dr. Griffin, if you don't mind, again, we're trying to accommodate your time. We're going to go. I think this is important for the broader view for us to know. We're going to have to go vote. Mr. Hall had a question first.
So would you say that you're less poo-pooed toward China now than you were?
Yes, sir, I would, and I can extend my time here to as long as you need.
No, I think well, as long as there's questions, but I hate for there to be gaps. Mr. Lampson will take over, and I wish if you would please, so that for the broader audience, complete that answer.
Complete that answer. I will do so, sir. So, and as I was saying, as well as an assessment of what is available from open sources. In particular, the capability of the Long March 5 and the Chinese dual launch processing capability that they've already demonstrated, I have become convinced that it is possible for China to mount a human lunar mission toward the end of the next decade, and quite possibly before we are able to return. I can provide that and the analysis that leads me to that conclusion for the written record, if you would like. There's nothing in it which is classified or in any possible way. So if you would like that analysis for the written record, I can provide it.
I think it'd be appropriate,
Okay,
for us
I'd be
to have that.
happy to do that. So, in summary, I think that a human lunar mission is clearly within Chinese capabilities by a decade from now, should they choose to do it, and their own outline of plans convinces me that they may well be.
I think it's something that we need to take a special note of, and in my opinion, what I believe personally that we may be in a greater period of challenge today than what we were in 1957. We just don't hear the beeps, and somehow or other we've got to start hearing them before they become a roar. I think his time has expired, and I got those words in under his time, and I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. Continue the question, Dr. Griffin. Again, I too want to add my welcome.
Thank you.
I want to turn our attention to the alpha magnetic spectrometer, about which we've had many conversations. And I know that you know that I believe that it's not only an important scientific research initiative, but one that represents a significant international scientific collaboration. And so I've got a whole long series of questions, and if you'll keep them as short as possible, I'll try to get through them as easily as we possibly can. But how important do you believe it is for the United States to be seen as a reliable partner in international scientific undertakings such as this?
I know where this is going. I will try to be short with my answers. I am well on record as believing that when the United States makes commitments, they should be kept.
And obviously believing that, would you also agree that NASA should strive to meet its commitment to the international AMS partnership if a practical way can be found to do so?
Again, of course, we should strive to meet our commitments if it is possible to do so.
Congress hasn't yet received the NASA's report on the AMS project that was requested in the omnibus appropriation. And speaking as an engineer with many years' experience in various space projects, what do you think would be the lowest cost, lowest risk way to deliver the AMS experiment to space in a timely manner?
The report that you seek is awaiting clearance within the administration. It will be provided to you as soon as we can do it. But to answer your question directly, the AMS was designed to go on board a space shuttle, and that is the clearly lowest cost, most straightforward, lowest risk approach to putting it on orbit. I mean, other means are possible, but that is the most straightforward way.
Okay. Do you have the authority to add an additional shuttle flight to the manifest on your own, or would you need to be directed to do so?
I do not have that authority. If I had that authority, I would have added the shuttle flight, and we would not be having this discussion.
Consequently, if you lack the authority to add the shuttle space flight on you, who would need to direct you to do so, OMB or Congress?
Well, OMB does not provide direction to NASA. OMB provides advice to the President, who directs NASA.
So it would be
of course, superseding even that is the law of the land. Now, the budget that Congress has appropriated for me and the authorization that Congress has provided to me does not include, at this point, an additional shuttle flight. Every shuttle flight that we plan to fly has been identified for the Congress and has been the subject of appropriated funds. So I have neither permission from the President nor authorization nor appropriation from Congress to fly another shuttle flight.
So neither the President nor OMB has indicated to you that it intends to direct you to add an additional shuttle flight to fly the AMS experiment?
Well, again, the OMB does not direct NASA, however much they might wish to. But the administration has not requested funds for an additional shuttle flight, and the Congress has not authorized or appropriated such funds. So I, as the administrator, do not make space policy. I carry it out, and none of my governing entities has asked me to do this flight.
By when would Congress have to direct you to take all necessary steps to fly an additional shuttle flight to deliver the AMS experiment to space
for it to be possible by the time the shuttle is scheduled to be retired? End of the year, end of the fiscal year, end of the calendar year, later than that?
The end of this calendar year, January '09 at the latest, or it is a done deal, because our manifest is coming to a close. We are flying the flights that we are authorized to fly with the hardware that we have bought and with the contracts that we have in place. If the Congress chooses to add another flight to our manifest, they need to tell me this year, within this calendar year.
Okay. I am concerned that the current approach to the ISS assembly may wind up jeopardizing its future viability. Specifically, the NASA manifest currently bookkeeps as contingency flights the two shuttle flights that are intended to fly critical spares and logistics to the ISS prior to the shuttle's retirement. It's my understanding that OMB doesn't consider those two flights to be part of the baseline shuttle manifest. Is that correct?
Sir, I can't get into what different offices in the Executive Office of the President think or don't think. I have, since my time as administrator, I have used several words inappropriately to my nearly everlasting regret. One of those was labeling those flights contingency flights. I was speaking too much as an engineer and not recognizing the policy import of that. In fact, those flights carry up, they're designed to carry hardware to support the station in the event of failure of certain systems. And given what we have experienced in terms of the failure rate of existing onboard systems, the spare units and other logistics material that those flights are manifested are not contingency flights. They are not contingency flights. They are necessary flights if we are to sustain the station through the 5-year gap between retirement of the shuttle and the deployment of Ares and Orion, because that every bit of statistical information we have says that equipment will be needed. And I deeply regret any confusion I have caused this committee by labeling them some years ago as contingency flights. They are spare hardware, and they are necessary in one fashion or the other. The question becomes, what is the easiest method to get them up, and that's with the shuttle.
And they're required if we want to ensure that the ISS remains a viable and useful facility after the shuttle is retired.
If you want to ensure that the ISS remains vital and useful as opposed to gambling on it, then yes, sir, they are required.
If you're not permitted to fly those flights, or if we don't provide the resources, whatever is necessary, what other credible options, if any, does NASA have to deliver those needed spares and logistics to the ISS?
Well, those flights, the funding for those flights is at present in our budget. So we can fly those with what we have. Now, there are no immediately credible alternatives, because the systems that I'm talking about would have to be remanifested on expendable vehicles with and fitted with automated rendezvous and docking systems and such that don't currently exist, that we're hoping will be developed for other commercial crew and cargo. So like other aspects of space station logistics support, they would have to be manifested on systems that don't yet exist.
Thank you very much, Dr. Griffin. My time is expired, and I yield to Penny of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we run back and forth here in the rain and everything else, I think I know what you're thinking. You're probably admiring the efficiency and the work habits of the United States Congress, Mr. Administrator. But we appreciate you being here.
Maybe you could take another break or two after that last round of questions.
Well, I hope mine will be. I hope mine won't be so taxing. I'd like to point out that the budget that you've requested this year is $17.3 billion. My numbers show that adjusted for inflation since 1992, the budget would have been, in today's dollars, $20.3 billion, which means roughly a $3 billion real cut relative to the NASA budget in 1992, almost a 20% reduction during the 1990s and the early part of the new millennium. And I think all of us have, felt the challenge and the pain of dealing with that. I want to ask you, as we talk about completing the International Space Station, several weeks ago there was some public discussion about the schedule possibly slipping for the Ares 1Y and the early Orion test flights. Could you set the record straight for us, and right now, according to your latest reviews, are you anticipating that there might be such slippage, and if there is going to be a decision about whether there is likely to be slippage, when do you anticipate that decision?
First of all, I'll comment on your remark about the decrement in the budget over the 90s. Yes, it is absolutely true. In real dollars, we lost some ground, several $billion during the 1990s, which has not been recouped since then, so you're right. Regarding the Ares 1Y flight, there was some discussion a few weeks ago within NASA, and including a memo that was released prematurely, saying that we were going to move the Ares 1Y flight date. Now, the goal behind that thinking was to offer the highest confidence of preserving the initial operational capability date, the IOC date, for the finished system. So it was just a matter of shuffling the deck chairs around to get the most comfortable seating for everybody. We, after looking at it more carefully, in fact, decided not to move the Ares 1Y test flight date at this time. We don't have a need to move it at this time, and so we're not going to do it. So I would say that's in abeyance indefinitely. If we do decide to shuffle our flight test schedule, you have my absolute commitment to share that information with your staff, make sure that everybody's on board as to what our flight test schedule is. I do want to reserve the right to plan the flight test schedule in the most sensible engineering manner possible. And I'm not saying that we would never move our dates around, but right now we're not doing that.
In terms of of completing the shuttle mission, if it becomes necessary because of slippage or timetables, or desirable to fly the last two contingency, you said we're no longer referring to these as contingency missions.
Well, I'll never be able to get rid of it, but I wish I had not used that term.
The so-called the resupply of missions. If it becomes necessary to do that after 2010, do you have an estimate of what the cost would be to continue the shuttle operations on a monthly or annual basis?
Well, we, having bought all the hardware already and having included in the budget that which is necessary to fly the manifest out to those last couple of flights, if we didn't get an appropriation, for example, in 2010 until December as opposed to September, or if the schedule slipped or anything, there would be no problem flying the last couple of shuttle flights out through the end of calendar year 2010. So the program is not sensitive to whether the last flight occurs in September of 2010 or December of 2010. We don't care. Now, to go beyond that, okay, we have to keep contractors in place and contracts alive that we intend to cancel. And so that then brings into play the carrying cost of the whole shuttle infrastructure, which is around $3 billion a year just to own the fleet and keep it active. Now, I can provide, I said around $3 billion. If you like, for the record, I can give you a more detailed answer. But the carrying cost for the shuttle fleet is around $3 billion a year. And I need to end that in 2010 so that I can move on with new systems.
Very good. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Finney. Thank you for the good job you're doing as our ranking member on this subcommittee. Mr. Udall is recognized. Former Chairman, Robacher is recognized.
What mistake was that?
Former Chairman and ranking member of the Space Committee.
Thank you very much, and I will commend my chairman, subcommittee chairman, Mr. Udall. He is doing a good job. I'd be very happy to be mistaken for Congressman Udall, and also let me note, Mr. Chairman, you're doing a great job, and both of on the subcommittee chairman and the committee chairman in dealing with space issues. I would applaud those leaders who are showing this bipartisan and I'd say very responsible approach and working with those of us who are on the other side of the aisle to try to make sure that we find the space program and make it successful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, some accolades for Administrator Griffin.
Yes, sir.
I consider you to be, I've been here 20 years now. When I got in this committee, I was sitting way over on the other side there, and that was the first 20 years ago I came in here, and of all the NASA administrators that I've seen come through here, you are the most innovative and creative and responsible. I say that without hesitation. So I congratulate you for keeping a positive spirit in the midst of must be just a bureaucratic challenge that would just overwhelm so many other people. We talked today about the $7.6 billion that is being requested. You have taken an approach that development of new technology and encouraging private sector investment, as well as restructuring NASA to be more efficient, are ways that can put those dollars to better use. So although it's easy for us just to focus on the dollar amount, that doesn't tell the whole story. And in fact, if we would just keep up with inflation, but would have less innovation, it would not be serving the interests of the American people. So I would congratulate you on not just taking the approach that we just need to back up the federal truck and shovel more dollars out into the NASA building, that we prioritize and efficiently. With that said, I liked your answer in terms of EELV versus shuttle technology upgrade. I would like to learn more about that.
Mr. Robacher, I think that particular microphone...
Yes, maybe I'm not up close enough. Can I hear?
Okay.
I was leaning back.
Okay.
That Red Bull that I had earlier today.
All right. Well, we're all intensely interested in your...
Yes.
So.
In terms of actually spending the money, you mentioned, of course, the 2005 space authorization, which laid a roadmap. And again, I take great pride in that because I participated in that. And it was, of course, President Bush who, after a long time, gave us at least a roadmap to look at, which other presidents had not done. But you talk about Moon and Mars as destinations, and you talk about the stepped approach. Are we spending, of that $17.6 billion, is there money being spent now on developing technologies that are not necessary for the first steps, but are only being spent for a preparation for a Mars expedition?
No, sir. The appropriations law for 08, the situation, of course, is a bit complicated. This committee, the Congress has authorized us to develop a sustained lunar presence and to prepare the way for Mars. And I'm not quoting exactly, but that's the thrust of it. However, the FY08 Appropriations Act enjoins us from spending any money on any technology that would be just for Mars, and so we're not doing that.
Okay, well that's the right answer.
I would hope that could be removed in future years.
Well, it depends on how close we're getting. Quite frankly, I believe by the time we go to Mars, that there will be such different technology capabilities, hopefully better technology capabilities, available to us, that it might be wasteful to spend money right now on putting together technology that might not be used for 20 years, and then 20 years from now there'd be other technology that would be better.
Well, yes, sir, I agree, but literally interpreted, the restriction puts questions on our utilization of the space station to study the adaptability of human beings to long-term spaceflight. So
I
Now,
see.
we're not interpreting it that way because I think the Congress wants us to do research on the space station. But the reason for doing research on the space station is for voyages farther away than 3 days, which is where the moon is.
Well, there was questions about the space station, whether or not that decision that was made so long ago was a right decision or wrong decision, and what you just brought up was a complication of that.
You're right. I have chosen to move past the space station decision to
Right.
accept it as done, finish the station, and then let's get on outward beyond Earth orbit.
And if the chairman would indulge me for just a few more moments, the Arecibo telescope and the near-Earth object mission that obviously is of great concern to me, and I think to the American people as well. You've made it very clear that you're willing to help, and NASA should be part of this, but that you don't have the budget for it. If we indeed come back with an authorization for NASA that is above the $17.6 billion budget request that you have, and we have included money specifically for a near-Earth object identification project and response project, as well as the Arecibo telescope, which is essential, absolutely essential if we are going to discover if there's a near-Earth object heading to the Earth. Would that be agreeable to you?
Well, sir, if the Congress authorizes an activity and appropriates funds for it, and the President signs that law, then of course it is agreeable to me. I will carry it out. I mean, of course. We are within the parameters of our existing funding for near-Earth object surveys. We are doing that, and
Yes.
in fact accelerating it slightly to meet the stated intent of Congress. Beyond the few million that we are spending on it, I can't go today because I have, again, neither presidential direction, congressional authorization, or appropriation. So,
well, those of us who think, who believe that this is a vital program and could well be important to the survival of the planet, are going to try to work with you and make sure that you are not just given the responsibility, but also have some extra resources for that.
well, I too am quite interested in the near-Earth objects, so I would find it agreeable.
And one last area, and that is, I want to congratulate you for your strong stand on permitting the potential commercial servicing of station for both supplies and crews as a means of promoting technology development and also saving money. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Robacher, and now Mr. Lamson is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to carry on from where I was a little while ago, just a quick question. We've had a lot of conversation about the gap, and the NASA Authorization Act of 05 directed NASA to develop and deploy an operational human space transportation system to replace the shuttle as close to 2010 as possible. The Authorization Act indicates launching a crew exploration vehicle as close to 2010. At any rate, what specific actions, if any, has the administration taken to comply with that congressional direction?
The budget request that the administration has made provides sufficient funds at 65% statistical confidence to deploy Ares and Orion, the shuttle replacement that you speak of, by March of 2015. And that is as close to the end of shuttle retirement as possible with the level of funding that is allocated.
Well, given the congressional direction in the Authorization Act, has the administration provided, or why hasn't it provided, any additional funding to the Constellation program to narrow the spaceflight gap?
Well, clearly the administration has not provided the funding to narrow that gap. I can't speculate as to why.
Did NASA request additional funds to do so?
NASA has had many discussions within the administration on this topic, and as I know that you know, we have many priorities, many funding priorities in the nation, all of which clamor for first attention. And the funding, the priority of closing the gap between shuttle retirement and deployment of new systems did not make it to the top.
What do you consider to be the most realistic options for narrowing the gap?
Well, the most realistic option at this point would be, I hate to say it this way, but add money. We answered this question for your colleague, Senator Nelson, on the record last November. And at this point, about the earliest achievable date, again, the earliest technically credible date that I could sign up to would be the fall of 2013, say September of 2013. And we would need $1 billion extra in 2009 and $1 billion in 2010 to do that, for a total of about $2 billion, as best we can tell today. With the past decisions that have already been taken and which are behind us, I cannot credibly promise anything earlier than 2013 at this point.
Was that put on the table in this budget process? Was that request specifically made? Because the law says do it as close to 2010 as possible. 13 is closer than 15. And if that's the wishes of Congress, did the President consider, or did you consider, or how?
I certainly considered it, and I cannot go into all of the discussions and debates that have been held within the administration as part of the process to generate a budget request. But certainly we worked very hard to understand what was needed, which was why I was able to give that answer to Senator Nelson on the record. And again, that priority was not judged to compete with other priorities that the nation has.
Would $1 billion at this point move that date to 2013, or what is the?
Well, the rate of progress is roughly 1 month for $100 million. Okay, roughly. Now, and again, $2 billion then should equal 20 months, but actually equals about 20 months actually from where we are. So that's the way to judge it. It's you can buy additional progress at about $100 million per month.
Thank you very, very much, and Mr. Chairman, I'll go about my time.
And again, we have answered all that for your colleague.
Thank you.
And Ms. Patterson, we thank you for your attention and attendance here today. And Mr. Udall, let's see. I guess I should go to Mr. Roebucker. I understand. Did you have a cleanup question? Well, I think that's where we are. Actually, we're in third.
Well, thank you very much. I want to focus on the subject area of Russia and payments to Russia and the complications that we face. Right now, we are, of course, dependent on Russia during this period of the quote gap.
That's correct, sir.
Okay, and I think you said it was $700 million worth of contracts. Is that right?
The current contract has a total value of about $780 million, and that expires at the end of 2011.
Right, and you would expect that we need to have another contract.
I do, if we are to utilize the station.
And what would that contract? How much would that contract be for?
Well, I don't know yet.
You don't know
because we haven't had those discussions with our Russian partners. But for a similar level of performance, it's unlikely that it would be less than today's value.
Right, and the legislation and legislative help that you need in order to we need to pass some legislation right now, and you might. If you would alert us to that, what we need to do to facilitate
the administration needs to come forward with a formal request. As I said earlier, my remarks today are in the nature of a heads up that I am working this within the administration, but that the Congress needs to grant an exemption to NASA from the Iran, North Korea, Syria Non-Proliferation Act. That is the action that will be required later this year.
Having worked on that legislation, I think I put some weasel words into the legislation that might be interpreted by a lawyer to get us out of a mess like that. Have your lawyers determined that those weasel words were not adequate enough to help you out of this problem?
Well, I am not an attorney, but our attorneys and within the administration, our attorneys' understanding of that, as you put it, weasel word, is it applies to an emergency of a highly temporary nature. So, for example, if we needed to pay to get crew off the station in an emergency during a time period that wasn't covered by the exemption, we could do that. But we could not open up a multi-year procurement for the delivery of goods and services to the station along the lines of the contract we have today. Your weasel words are inadequate to permit that.
Sorry about that. One last note. I commend you for your creative approach to the resupply for station, which includes this opening up to commercial bidding for services for both supply and for crew. That same approach in terms of offering contracts or giving a reward to the private sector for developing alternatives to having something done within NASA itself. I have, as you know, a piece of legislation aimed at establishing a national endowment which would provide prizes. The whole purpose would be to provide prizes for the development of new technologies that could be useful to NASA and aerospace in general. Do you have any thoughts on that legislation?
Not in any sort of detail that I would want to air here. Broadly speaking, I think that the prize activity that we have seen so far has been very promising and certainly brings attention to space. I hope that it can be found to have some longer lasting value as well.
It seemed to me that if we see something that works and seems to have been of value, that we could expand upon it. And the whole prize notion serves the taxpayers well, because you don't have to pay off unless someone has actually achieved what you've laid down as the purpose of the prize. So thank you very much again for your great leadership in NASA. And I have one other question that my staff was looking for. Western governors have, they are looking at, they're worried that Landsat thermal infrared capabilities are not going to serve their interests, looking at their water issues. Do you know anything about that?
I don't, sir. If you supply it for the record, we'll answer it for the record. But I'm unfamiliar with that concern. I'm sorry.
One of the great paybacks that the space program has had for humankind, and especially for the American people, is our ability to help us make determinations as to where water resources should be used and how, and some of our critical analysis of what's going on in the land from space. So that's really something. Whenever we can get a payback for the American people by helping them work their way, find the answers to water shortages, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Robacher. As we have discussed, this committee is going to be spending a lot of time this year looking at water and looking at how we can find efficiencies both in the industrial and the residential section. And again, my apologies to Ms. Richardson for my block. And I think Mr. Udall is going to be our cleanup man.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Griffin, if I might, I'd like to turn back to discussion about NAOMS. I've got a series of questions I'd like to direct your way, and then ask you to answer the questions. Do you plan to make any additional data releases beyond what's already been made public? What's the current status of your plan to have the academies review, national academies, that is, the NAOMS project? And have they started their review? What specifically have you asked the academies to do? When do you anticipate that the review would be completed? And do you have any plans to revisit the decision to terminate the NAOMS project? And if so, when?
I'll try to remember all those
Yeah.
questions, and I will ask you for help if I screw up. With regard to plans to resume NAOMS, no, we have no plans to resume NAOMS. We think that all of the goals of NAOMS with regard to aviation safety are being accomplished in coordination with the FAA with ongoing programs. So it's not that we don't like those goals. We think we are pursuing them outside of the context of NAOMS. We do plan additional data releases this year. We provided a heavily redacted version to meet my end-of-the-year commitment on New Year's Eve. I'm sorry for that. It was the best we could do. We have named a program manager at the Glenn Research Center. That program manager will report directly to the Office of the Administrator at NASA. The purpose of that effort for that program manager will be to draft and issue a request for proposals from various firms to, with an appropriate statistical data redaction capability, to go over the NAOMS survey data and appropriately redact confidential commercial information and to protect respondent anonymity while releasing the maximum possible intellectual content in the data. And when I talk about the data, again, this is a matrix of data, 29,000 rows by several hundred columns. So it is an enormous amount of data. We must be very certain that we don't compromise individual identities and that we don't release voluntarily supplied commercially confidential information. The original contractor on the NAOMS study was supposed to do that, but as I pointed out in prior hearings, we have found cases where that was not done, and we need to be more careful before we release it. You asked about but we will provide staged releases over the course of the year as the data is studied. We will do it as often as we can, and we will keep you informed. Now, the unredacted data, I know that the Congress is furnishing that to the GAO to allow its assessment of the potential utility of the NAOMS data, and I applaud that. Additionally, we are working with the National Research Council, National Academies, as you mentioned. We would like them to examine the data for its potential utility. NASA has been criticized for saying that we don't see much utility to this data and have moved on with other programs with the FAA. But in case we are wrong, I would like to have the National Academy take a look at the unredacted data and judge independently if there is value in it. To do that, initially has been a bit of a problem because our early inputs from the Academy were that any data which comes to them has to be released publicly. That, of course, is not possible. However, the people who were making those statements weren't attorneys, and it turns out that when their attorneys and ours have spoken, that they believe they have a way forward to treat this data with appropriate confidentiality, which is necessary, while assessing it in its unredacted form for potential utility. And if that works out, then I will be very happy.
Do you have a sense of the timeline?
That will occur over the course of this year. I cannot, the National Academy takes the time it takes, and in my prior experience, getting anything out of them in much less than a year is not feasible. So I would say over the course of this year, as soon as reasonably possible.
Thank you, Dr. Griffin. Mr. Chairman, if I might, I'd ask a final question, seeing my time's about to run out for the record, and I want to turn back to the new Earth science and space science missions that have been proposed. As I said in my initial statement, I'm excited and keen to see where that leads us. I am concerned about the price tags that are associated with them, and I wanted to direct a general question, which is why should we be confident that NASA can actually carry out the proposed new missions under the science budgets assumed for the future, and specifically using the Mars Science Laboratory, the MSL, as an example of that. It's supposed to be launched next year. It's facing, as I understand it, new development problems, although it was subject to a serious review not that long ago. I know the committee would be interested in knowing what the problems with the MSL are, how serious are they, and what we can do to fix them. And then how confident are you that we'll be able to meet its '09 launch date? And then more broadly, what steps is NASA taking to ensure that the same types of problems that have afflicted MSL don't afflict the proposed new missions? So,
Do you want me to answer now or for just for the record?
I would defer to the chairman as to how much time we have left, and would certainly be more than happy with the comments for the record, or right now.
If you want to summarize, and then you can provide additional information for the record.
We will answer in full for the record. Let me give you a quick summary. MSL is having heat shield problems. Our earlier assumption on using what we call SLAW, super lightweight ablative, like we use on the shuttle external tank, that it would make an adequate heat shield for MSL, did not survive actual tests. So we are going to a material called pica, which is a stronger ablator. That is going to cost several tens of millions of dollars. In addition, there are I would not say other developmental problems, but just increased costs. Things have gone more slowly than we would like. We still believe at this point that we can make the September of '09 launch date. If that changes, we are looking at options to launch in 10 and options to launch in 11. So Mars Science Lab is a flagship mission in the Mars program. It's very crucial to us. It's something that has never been done before. I mean, development problems are to be expected, and I don't honestly consider that the problems they're having are I wouldn't call them out of family. I have great confidence in the Mars Science Lab team. I really do, which is not to say that they aren't overrunning some, and we're going to have to figure out a way to deal with that. And we'll give you a more complete answer on the record.
Thanks again, Dr. Griffin, for being here today.
Thank you, sir.
It appears that the inquisitive Mr. Robacher has one more question.
I don't want to take up Mr. Baird's time unless... Well, thank you. Just very quickly, I certainly am supportive of what you've outlined for us today about the need for cooperation with Russia, and I think that the cooperation with Russia has served America's interest. I would suggest, on the other hand, that cooperation with China has not served our interest. In fact, we've learned a lot from the Russians, and in fact, every time we've cooperated in space with the Chinese, they've basically stolen our technology, and we see them knocking satellites out of the air. Is there at this time any plan to permit American satellites to be launched on Chinese rockets or any other type of cooperation with the Chinese government?
I don't know, sir. I have no such plans, but I don't know what other entities may be.
Thank you, Mr. Robacher. Before we bring the hearing to a close, I want to thank our witness for testifying before the committee today. The record will remain open for additional statements from the members and for answers to any follow-up questions the committee may ask the witnesses. The hearing is now adjourned.